Hello, this is SUSECON Digital, pulling IoT metrics into Prometheus from Grafana. Today's session, we'll be covering a project that I hope you guys will enjoy. Doing this project for you today is myself, yours truly, Patrick Swartz. I'm a sales engineer here at SUSE. I cover the central US, but I have been known to take SUSE and OpenSUSE into the isolated regions of Ethiopia. Be sure to talk to me about that later. So let's get into our session here. So what are we going to do? What are we going to talk about? Well, first I need to give you a little bit of the background. What's the goal here? Why are we doing this? I want to talk to you a little bit about the hardware, the software, and the sensor that I used in this project. Review with you how the lab was set up, the software, the sensor configuration, how to wire it together. And then I'm going to bring it all in together with a demo and go over some of the individual steps. And then hopefully at the end, we'll review and cover some of the things that we learned along the way. So that's our goal for today. The background of this, at a previous job, I was tasked to deploy a bunch of Raspberry Pis and collect temperature data throughout a building in conjunction or relationship to windows and doors and cubicles, and create an online graphing system so that the building maintenance personnel could keep track of. I used a closed source proprietary software that I was very familiar with at the time, and created this really nice graph, and the maintenance personnel really enjoyed it. However, for this project, I wanted to recreate that previous project, but only using open source software. And that was my primary goal, to replicate that. Along the way, because I knew so much more about the closed source proprietary software, but I didn't know that much about Prometheus and Grafana, I wanted to use this as an opportunity to learn as well. And at the same time, I wanted to use SLE 15 SB3 and validate that it could be used on Raspberry Pis and be able to read the GPIO pins that are needed to pull the metric data from the temperature sensors. So that's our goal. That's what we want to replicate here today. We go through this. And here is a screenshot of what we're trying to achieve. You can see I've got a couple of gauges and a couple of bar graphs and a line graph. So we're gonna try to recreate that here along the way and show you how it all worked. For the hardware that I used one of my Raspberry Pi 3s. I had a couple of Raspberry Pi 4s, the DS18B20 sensors, one for each machine. Had a couple of virtual machines for SUSE Manager that I used to help make this a little easier to deploy. And then, of course, my virtual machine for my monitoring server. And of course, all of these, whether they be the Raspberries or the virtual machines, they all are running SLE 15 SB3 beta. I used Prometheus and Grafana, and of course, I mentioned SUSE Manager. And then I found a really nice project on GitHub that had a one-wire exporter for the DS18B20 sensors, and I'll show you that when we get there. Of course, here's the pictures of what I used. You can see that there's my Raspberry Pi 3s and 4s. There's the DS1820B water temperature sensor. And of course, KVM to host my virtual machines on my laptop. Here's my software that I use. Like I mentioned, there's the versions of each one of of what I used here. And then there's the link to the GitHub Prometheus exporter for the one-wire sensor. And then here, this is now we're going to talk about how you actually wire things up. On the Raspberry Pi, whether it be a 3 or a 4, it doesn't really matter in this case. We take the 3 wires from the temperature sensor, and that's considered a one-wire temperature sensor because only one wire is used to collect the data from for all the communications is done from the one wire. But we need power and we need ground. and we need a pull-up resistor. So we wire that all together. We put, obviously, power goes to the 3.3 volt line of the Raspberry Pi. The data line goes to the GPIO pin 4, which is actually pin 7 on the Pi. And then, of course, you've got ground connected. And then, of course, that pull-up resistor between the data and power is needed. Again, that's a simple wire up to set that up. Then, to actually configure SLE 15 SP3, really simple. I just needed to create a new file under boot EFI called extraconfig.txt. In that file, I put in a line that says DT overlay equals W1-GPIO. That's it. And that's all I needed to do. Reboot the box, and then I was able to very quickly confirm that the module is loaded with that overlay. And you can see here, W1 therm and W1 GPIO, both of them loaded, and they're used by the wire module here. At the same time, I could check the Raspberry Pis themselves as well to make sure that they are reading the device. And I'll show you this on a live system here when we get to the demo. I can count the device, and these particular sensors all start out with 28. Each of these sensors are serialized, and so each sensor will have a different serial number here. That way you can use multiple sensors on an individual Raspberry Pi. You can also then group them and do things with them. But you can see, yes, it is actually working, which is really cool. All right, so now, how do we set up the Prometheus server? Well, since I use SUSE Manager to actually deploy the Prometheus server formula to my monitor server, then all I needed to do was add a individual job for the one wire that I wanted to collect. And that was simply a matter of these 3 lines that you see here. I gave it a job name called one-wired-clients. Set up some static configs of my targets, and here I just hard-coded my 3 Raspberry Pis that I'm collecting the data from. And then that's it. Restarted Prometheus server, and I was able then to validate that those were working. Now, for my clients, I needed to get that temperature exporter out to each one, so I found that GitHub project, it needed to be compiled. So using Golang, I was able to compile the exporter. And once I had it compiled, then I was able to then deploy it. I used SUSE Manager again to deploy it using a salt state. I created a formula for this, which I will show you later as well. But you can see very simple here, state file telling where my source is for this binary. The permissions for it, and then of course the command.run to actually tell it to run, and this is where I hard-coded the port that the exporter will share its metric data on. Pretty simple stuff. So let's validate. Let's make sure it all works. If we go to the server, the Prometheus server, and then :9090, which is the default port for Prometheus, /targets, you can see that they'll have, my target. There's my job that I set up in my YAML file. And I can see that the data that it went out and found, and you can see that, it tells me it's up or not. At the same time, I can go to the client's IP address, :9090, and I can see that it's actually pulling both Celsius and Fahrenheit temperatures. Way cool stuff. So I can validate that things are working. All right. So now to set up Grafana, since I deployed Grafana also with SUSE Manager and the formula that's provided, I just needed in that I was able to tell it, in the formula, it asked for a username and password. Once I've deployed it, I can then now log into Prometheus at the server, Grafana server :3000. And log in with the username and password that I set up in the SUSE Manager formula when I deployed it. And then now all I need to do now is set up the data source. Where is it going to go get the data? and I'm going to point it back, in this case, back to itself. But the Prometheus server :9090 is my URL for this data source. It's a Prometheus data source because Grafana can pull data from lots of other data sources. In this case, we're pulling it from Prometheus, so it knows how to read the data. And that's where I told it where it was at, :9090, and then at the bottom here, test and save and test, green lights all around, and we're good to go. And then now we just need to move on to the dashboard. We need a dashboard to actually see what we're collecting. And I went ahead and created a sample dashboard that you can go out and pull down and play with in my GitHub space here. And you just simply import this dashboard JSON file, and I can show you where that's all at. Okay. All right. So now it's demo time. It's time to review what we've done. I'll show you the SUSE Manager formula. We'll add a new dashboard, actually a dashboard panel in our existing dashboard, and see what we've got going on. All right. So if I can make this work here. All right. So here's our systems. You can see that I've got my Prometheus server here, :9090/targets. Let's refresh this page. And sure enough, last scrape was done a couple of seconds ago. And you can see all three of my Raspberry Pis are running. If we go to the individual Raspberry Pis, refresh my page here, we can see the temperatures are actually there. Temperature Celsius and Fahrenheit, both of these that I have up. You can see on this one, for example, I set up a label that I was planning to use at some point. I could use my label in here to actually further break things down into different groups. But you can see that there's a lot of functionality we can actually explore here. And if I go to the Grafana server, you can see here that I've got I've got some gauges, I've got some bars, I've got some line graphs here. You notice that some of them are red. I've got I set a threshold, and we'll come back to this, of 75 degrees. If it breaks 75 degrees, turn it red. As you can see right there, this one's really close to breaking that 75-degree mark. And so we'll come back to this and actually add a panel to our demo. Here in SUSE Manager, if we look at our systems, here you can see my Raspberry Pis. If I go to formulas here, let's just make this a little bigger here. You can see that I've got my one-wire formula set up. Okay, I'll show you how that was built and simply enabled. I did have the address set up here, but I'm not using this line at the moment. I hard-coded this line for now. Okay, and then for my systems, for my monitor server, I can show you the formulas there. You can see here that I actually deployed Prometheus and Grafana server pieces for my server. And here it's a matter of just, I clicked on enabled, I set up the username and password here, and the rest of this I left default. The URL and that it's going to pull, that's going to use. The rest of this was basically default. And the same for Prometheus. All I had to do was set it was enabled, and told it my SUSE manager's name and password, and left the rest of it default, and saved the formula, ran a high state, and boom, it was able to deploy Prometheus and Grafana server pieces to my monitor server. Okay. So now let's go back to Grafana and actually look at, let's create a new dashboard, a new panel here. So let's go up here, simply add a panel. Well, before that, let's look at this panel, and we could show you a little bit about this panel and how it was built. So let's edit this panel. Simply clicking the letter E, which I found out is how you get into the panel editor mode. And you can see my metrics here. I'm pulling the temperature _F, which is why I'm getting the Fahrenheit temperature. I've told it to use the stats visualization. And under fields here, I'm telling it to use Fahrenheit for my units and my thresholds. Here's where I set the 75-degree threshold. Okay. So let's now go back to this. Let's add a panel. Okay, we're going to add this panel, and here we're going to let's get the Celsius. See, it automatically starts filtering out the metrics that it's collecting. So we're going to go ahead and get these temperatures Celsius this time. And this time, let's do should we do a bar graph maybe here? All right, so I can see instantly what it's going to look like. I can change my title here, and so we're going to say new temps. Okay, all right, and let's set a threshold here. Let's change this threshold down to 72. Let's make it 72 temperature. All right, maybe we'll see some different colors here. All right. All right, and that's all I'm going to need to do. I could change the legend. Instead of getting all of this, I could just say, like I did on the others, instance here, okay? And now you can see it just simply removes all of the rest of the stuff that I didn't necessarily need and showing me my instance names. All right, let's apply that, and bingo. And oh, you see the mistake I made? I told it my threshold was in Fahrenheit and not in Celsius. So let's change this again. Let's edit this and go back to our field and go back to our threshold. Let's change this down to something like 32. All right, let's try that. Apply, and sure enough, looky there. All right, and now my threshold is starting to, it shows me that it's actually running, it's at 34 degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius, 93 degrees Fahrenheit. As you can see, my bar graph changed colors a little bit for me. So it's kind of cool, huh? So that's kind of the demo. Let's jump back over to our presentation here. And then here oops, wrong way. So what did we learn? Well, first off, we learned that SLE 15 SP3 is a valid Raspberry Pi OS. It does, the GPIO pins do work to collect our metric data from that DS18B20 sensor. We learned how to actually wire it together and get things connected. I showed you how I deployed Prometheus server and the exporters. Makes it very simple with a tool like SysManager. And then I set up a Grafana dashboard panel to create a new panel there, and so it's a lot going on, a couple of pages, and not a lot of time to really dig into the details. But I hope it's enough to whet your whistle to want to go out and explore and learn some more about what we can do, and have some fun. I also wanted to show you a couple of the related sessions that are going on during SUSECON Digital. There's at least 5 of these that I found that are related to mine. The monitoring Kubernetes clusters, the monitoring the high availability SAP applications, and then, like I mentioned, writing the SALT formulas with SUSEManager. And there's a fun project called GNU Health using SUSE on a Raspberry Pi. Very, very wonderful project going on with that. And then I want to hope you guys go and test and look at SLE 15 SP3 and what's coming, so you can get excited about what SP3 brings to us, and enjoy the rest of the SUSECON Digital sessions. And I look forward to meeting you in person at some point in the future. Thank you and have a wonderful day.